Discovery class, thanks for coming by. I'm going to give you a new twist today to a very familiar passage of Scripture. Romans 8 and 28. Here's the twist. Romans 8 and 28 never fails to operate. We know that all things work together for good for those who love God and to those who are called according to his purpose. What does it mean? It's a promise that God has made to you and me, and we're not left to chance. We're not victims of some blind force. It's just the opposite. We're being guided and we're being protected. And I'm not talking about signs of the zodiac or the movement of the planets. I'm talking about a God that rules and he overrules every circumstance in life. Do you believe that? I'm going to show you how this works over the next number of classes that you attend with me, because I'm going to take you on a journey. Do you want to go on a journey? Well, come on. I'm going to tell you the story of Joseph. It covers the biggest portion of the book of Genesis. His story begins in the 30th chapter of that book, when he's only 17 years old. He's tending the flocks of his father Jacob, along with his brothers. Between this beginning and the record of his death, 93 years later, at the age of 110, we find details of an amazing life. And that's what we're going to learn. The story of Joseph is the tale of jealousy. It's the tale of deceit. It's the tale of slavery. It's the tale of injustice. It's the tale of lust. It's the tale of rivalry. And finally, it's the story of forgiveness. Brothers hate brothers. Do you hate your brother? But back of all this, there's an overruling hand. And it's the hand of God. He's practicing Romans 8 and 28. Everything works together for good for those that love him. You mean there is good to come out of jealousy? What good could come out of deceit, Ron? Ron, injustice. What good can come out of that? How can that be? Well, that's what we're going to learn together over the next few lessons. With all that baggage that you and I carry, have you ever wondered, does God really care? Who's the boss anyway? Do you ever get scared and wonder about what tomorrow might bring? That was Joseph. He asked that question before he was 17 years old. Come along with me. Let's look at his life before he was 17. Here's his family background. What were his family ties? Well, his great-great-grandfather was Abraham. His grandfather, his name was Isaac. His dad, his name was Jacob. Joseph inherited quite a father. Not sure I'd want to have him as my dad, but he did. Jacob was his dad. His name meant crook. He was a swindler. As a personality, I guess you'd call him a manipulator. Was your dad a manipulator? Did he manipulate you? He chiseled his twin brother Esau out of his birthright. That's recorded in Genesis 25, 27 and on. When Esau found out, he was going to kill his brother Jacob. But his mother Rebekah, she sent him to live with her brother, whose name was Laban, away off in a far country called Padan Aram. That was the 28th chapter of Genesis, beginning there at verse 2. He stayed with his uncle Laban for 14 years after he fled his twin brother Esau. It was there he found his wife. Her name was Rachel. But to get her, he was deceived by his father-in-law and was given her older sister, Leah, instead. So 7 years later, 14 years, he finally gets the lady of his love, Leah's younger sister, Rachel. He had to wait 7 more years for that. Okay. Now marrying 2 wives, Jacob has 12 kids, 11 sons, and 1 daughter, Dinah. One of those sons was Joseph. His mother was Rachel. Benjamin, Joseph's younger brother, he was the caboose of all those 12 children. His mother Rachel, giving birth to Benjamin, died in childbirth. Oh boy. And that's all recorded in Genesis 31 through Genesis 36. But Joseph's name is only mentioned 3 times over those first 17 years of his life. Now we get to chapter 37 of Genesis. Joseph is going to be the central focus of our narrative. So I want you to get ready. We're going to look into the eyes of a 17-year-old teenager who's been through more excitement, more intrigue, more pathos than most of us would ever experience in our whole lifetime. Was your family dysfunctional? Joseph's was. Can anything good come out of that? Do you think Romans 8 and 28 still would operate? I don't think so. What's going to fit Joseph's character as a 17-year-old child, a teenager? Well, stay tuned. God always plans ahead. Do you plan ahead? God does. He has plans for you. You may not even know that, but he does. God moves in mysterious ways, his wonders to perform. He plants his footsteps in the sea and rides upon the storm. You've heard that one. Joseph really was a remarkable 17-year-old boy. His father was prosperous. His family was large. I think back of all this, Joseph knew that God had something in store for him, but he was never told what it was. Here in his early beginnings in Genesis 37, you see the dealings that God is up to. There's something going to happen in his life. 3 things that I'm going to pop out of this chapter for you that'll give you some of the hints that's been hiding in Joseph. He's about to do something. God's hiding in the shadows. And he's going to come out of the shadows and he's going to put Joseph into a test. And he's going to do something for him that's going to change his whole life. Now, here are 3 things I want you to follow in this chapter. 1, I want to talk about Joseph spoiled. 2, I want to talk about Joseph spit upon. 3, I want you to look at Joseph sought out. First thing, Joseph was spoiled. In the third verse of chapter 37, here's what it says. Now Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had borne him in his old age. Rachel, his mother, hadn't had any children until she was of old age. Now comes this beautiful little baby. It's a baby boy, born in Jacob's old age and Rachel's old age. And they've been waiting a lifetime for that to happen, and suddenly there it is. Had to be a wonderful surprise. He waited, she waited. Finally, he came. They kept waiting and waiting and waiting. Finally, she got pregnant, and along comes Joseph. Will Rachel ever give another offspring? Well, she did. His baby brother Benjamin, but it cost her life. She died in childbirth. Everywhere that Jacob went, Joseph went. Instant attachment. He was the object of his father's love and affection, but, class, he got spoiled. That often happens, you know, when that happened. Jacob's brothers watched all of this, and it ticked them off. They got very jealous. Favoritism. The brothers could live with that. But when it translates into things, then something happens. Trouble starts. Verse 3. Jacob gave Joseph an expensive, richly ornamented robe. That visible reminder stuck in their brother's craw as a favored status. They hated him for that. Why? Because it set Joseph apart. With that coat on display, Jacob's affection was also on display. He liked Joseph more than they did, more than them. The brothers saw this as a transfer of leadership. Joseph was elevated to a class away above them. It should have belonged to Reuben. He was the oldest brother. Every time Joseph put on his coat, the brothers said, "That little spoiled brat. Look at him." We hate that coat, and we hate him. Verse 4. When Joseph's brothers saw that his father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and couldn't speak even a kind word to him. You're kidding. The brothers' problem? They were jealous. So would you. Are you jealous of your brother because he's got more than you had? Is that why you haven't spoken to him in a number of years? Jealousy is a monster, you know. Just a great big monster. It can eat you alive. Happiness and success of others can poison you and your inner being because of jealousy. You can handle demotion better than promotion because you're not climbing over somebody else. You be careful. It can destroy you. There's an old expression. It takes more grace than I can tell to play the second fiddle well. These brothers didn't play second fiddle very well. Joseph was spoiled. They just couldn't stand him. Okay, that's the first thing we see in this chapter. Joseph was spoiled. Secondly, Joseph was spit upon. Verse 5. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen, I have a dream, and we were binding sheaves of grain, and in the field, when suddenly my sheaves rose and stood right up, while your sheaves, they gathered around mine, and they all bowed down to my sheaf. His brothers said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? And they hated him all the more because of that dream and what he had said. Joseph's brothers' hatred began to intensify. I think mine would too. People would spit on me if I said that. If I said what Joseph said, I think they'd spit on me. Would they spit on you? I think they would. There was Joseph, standing with his coat of many colors, spouting off that he was going to be the Lord over his siblings, and they would just gingerly take it. Would you? Do you think God was involved in that dream? Did he have a plan in mind somewhere down the way? The brothers hated, and that hatred boiled over, and it became spittle. Joseph was spit upon. Here comes the third. Joseph was sought out. Verse 12. Now his brothers had gone to gaze their father's flock near Shechem. Jacob said to Joseph, son, come. I'm going to send you over to them. Go and see if all is well with your brothers and with their flocks. And would you bring me back word how you think they're doing? When Joseph left for Shechem, Jacob stared at the back of his head, and he wouldn't see him again for the next 20 years. Really? That's right. When he left his presence and went off to Shechem to see those brothers, Jacob never saw his son Joseph again for 20 years. Looking back, I think if Jacob knew what was coming, he would never have let him go. That's my thought. But God knew what he was doing. He knows what you're doing. It's going to be better in the long run. For Joseph to be heading for trouble than to stay home with his dad where all was going to be well. I'll tell you why. Verse 17. So Joseph went off after his brothers and found them near Dothan. But they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. Here comes that dreamer, they said. Come, let's kill him, and let's throw him down in a cistern, and say that a ferocious animal had devoured him. Then we'll see what's going to become of his dreams. Do you see what's going on? These 10 brothers, they looked up, they watched. Joseph appears on the horizon. They recognize his coat, and they plot to kill him. Here's the story. And you know, when you look at this story, it's a bit of a touch of irony. The one that they're going to kill is the very one that someday is going to keep them from starving to death. The one who will be their salvation is the one that they're going to throw down in this well. God knew what was coming. Joseph is going to be sent into Egypt for the preservation of his whole family in the day of famine. The brothers didn't know that. They just wanted to kill the person that they couldn't stand living in his life. Joseph was singled out. He was sought. And they found him out. Did it ever occur to you that you could be sought and that God was going to use you? Down the way, somewhere, you're going to be the savior maybe of your family, maybe of your son, maybe of your wife. You don't know. What do we get from this story? Joseph was spoiled. Joseph was spit upon. Joseph was sought out. God's in control of all the plots and all the pits. God knows about our dreams. He wants us to prosper even when others are jealous. Joseph, he didn't ask for that coat. His dad gave it to him. He didn't make up the dreams in his head. God gave them to him. I find that amazing. Joseph, tossed down in a cistern. He thought it was his darkest hour. God didn't see that dark hole. That dark hole is going to be his provision. Are you in a dark hole? You can't see the light? You know, life can be very disappointing, you know. Have you ever felt that low? In that hole, God had a purpose. You don't know it. Joseph didn't know it. But you're going to learn that even in the darkness, that rejection is going to become your gateway. Do you believe that? I want you back here next week. All of you, come on back next week. I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. Beautiful story. It's right in the middle of the book. And I want you to be here part of it. Will you come back? I'm going to watch for you. Thanks for joining me today.